Hey guys, you're watching Hashtag Pool Guys Unfiltered, and we're diving deep into all your pool and spa related questions. And on this episode, I'm so excited. We're with Mr. John Rader with Farm Bureau Insurance because we're going to answer all your questions in regards to insurance. So in this episode, I'm so excited because we get this question a lot. When it comes to insurance, when I have a swimming pool, buying a home with a pool, or if I want to install a pool. And I'm here with my man, John Rader from Farm Bureau Insurance. John, go ahead and, man, introduce yourself to everybody. I appreciate you coming on the episode. Tell everybody who you guys are, what you're all about.
Justin, thanks for having us. My name's John Rader. I'm the agency manager, owner of the Northern Madison agency here in Madison County, Kentucky, Farm Bureau Insurance.
That's awesome. And as you guys can see, it's not the chair. It's just a little bit of height difference here. We got John, who back behind us, you can see where his jersey's hanging. He was senior 2000 on the Kentucky football team. I have to say that's an awesome honor, and for me to be able to sit here and talk to a gentleman, played for UK, which diehard Cats fan. I bet that was probably a pretty awesome experience, and it's kind of led you into great things of being a good leader in Farm Bureau with insurance and everything like that, right?
It has. I mean, it was a great honor. Took a lot of work, of course, and a lot of God-given ability. But luckily, got there, had a full ride, had 5 good years at UK. And yes, it doesn't really help me much in business, but it's a talking point.
Yep.
People coming here, it's something to talk about. Get a little name recognition every now and then, but not very often.
That's awesome, yeah. And I love to say when I was younger, when I was watching, I knew who you were, but I think that was more of I remember Tim Couch and Craig Yeast and them, but
well, yeah, that's what when I tell everybody says, "Hey, you played at UK?" I said, "Yeah, I played with Tim Couch."
Yeah. You were that era. Okay, yeah. That's awesome. Well, like I said, guys, on this episode, I'm so excited because a lot of our other episodes, a lot of people keep referring to insurance. And owning a swimming pool, John, a lot of customers I get constantly are asking, what do I need to do about insurance? What do I have to have? So let's just go to the basic question. If you own an above ground or in ground, no matter what, should you have insurance on a swimming pool?
Basically, the insurance is going to be covered under your home, your mobile home, your farm policy. The biggest thing is just make sure it is installed to spec. Most insurance companies require, which with Farm Bureau does, requires a 4-foot fence with a locking gate. So as long as you have a 4-foot fence with a locking gate, it's a 5% surcharge. So on an average premium of $1,000 per year, pool's going to raise your insurance about $50 per year. You're good to go.
And that's a great point. Once again, as you guys watching a lot of our episodes, we talk a lot about making sure you get the right pool contractor that is keeping everything in specs as far as insurance to the pool codes, things like that. And that's one thing we try to pride ourselves with is making sure the fence, it's self-latching. It's got to be 48 inches in Kentucky here, especially Madison County where we're out of. Those are the kind of things that are really important and go hand in hand. So, let's kind of dive deep because, a lot of times when it comes to this insurance, it's always that people want to hear them crazy stories of things going on as far as people diving in swimming pools, getting injured. Is it my neighbors, friends, or their kids, those things. So, is there a bigger liability when it comes to an in-ground swimming pool versus an above ground?
It's about the same. To me personally, the in-grounds are a little more dangerous just because a small child can walk into the pool. Yeah. That's the biggest thing. An above ground pool, usually that can't happen, or there's a ladder they have to climb. Insurance companies, the biggest thing they worry about is a small child, especially a neighbor child or somebody from down the street walking into your backyard, walking into the pool and drowning.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the safest things. We do not want any children, obviously, doing those things. So everyone at home, you want to make sure you have the proper, like he said, gates to proper safety around the pool. So as far as, when it comes to insurance of in-ground, above ground, like we said, do you think that there's something more as far as pool damage now? Let's say if somebody, weather, or somebody just come and tears up your pool, is that covered under basic insurance as far as, or is that something extra you have to have, or?
Well, it kind of goes back to on a homeowner's policy, you get 10% of your structure to cover other structures. So let's say you have a $250,000 house, you get $25,000 automatically included in that policy to cover a pool. So that's where now most people, and I always recommend contact your agent from the get-go. Let him know you're building a pool and how much you plan to have in it, because the big thing is let's say you have a $300,000 house, you're going to have $30,000 coverage for that pool. But let's say you spend 70 on it, you're 40,000 short. So always you want to, include that. Ray, you can add coverage for the extra if you want to go over. Another thing you got to take into consideration is, let's say you have a $300,000 house, but you have a $30,000 detached garage, and then build a $50,000 pool. You need to raise that $50,000 to cover that pool.
That's good numbers and things to think about in here. So let me ask you this then. With all that being said, let's do the difference of this. So if I'm a homeowner and I want to build a pool, what's some of the things I should do? Or, and this might be a little redundant on answering some of these questions, but I think it's good to know for the customers here, or all the listeners. So if I own a home and I want to build a pool, what should I contact you, and what should we look into as far as adding that value and getting the right amount? If I'm spending $50,000 or $100,000 on a pool, how do I know to say, hey, I want to make sure I'm covered?
Everybody's different. I've had some clients build a $100,000 pool. They're saying, John, I don't worry about it. Okay. Because, a lot of people think nothing can happen to this pool except an earthquake. And a lot of people don't have earthquake on their policy anyway.
Not in Kentucky.
Or with an earthquake, if you did have a $400,000 house, a lot of times earthquake has a 10% deductible. So you're responsible for the first $40,000. So that's why a lot of people don't have earthquake. And they say, well, nothing else can really affect my pool. I still recommend insuring it for the total value that you got in it. And the main reason for that is, let's say we have a tornado and it rips your house down, and we've got to demolish it, demo it, excavate, build you that same house in that same spot. Well, more than likely that pool is real close to that house. So we can't not touch that pool and build you that house back. So normally they'll have to rip that pool out to build the house back. So then we got to build the pool back too. So if you don't insure it for the full amount, you may be stuck building the house back with no pool.
And that's a very good point. Very good right there. So how does insurance work then if I'm a family, my wife and I, and we want to buy a home and already has a pool? Is that a little bit saying we want to do you get appraisal, or do we look into seeing what the pool might be worth? Or is that still, like you said, fall under homeowners insurance, as in that 25% or whatever? How does that?
It does fall, it will be covered. So it's going to be a little bit different, because if you're buying a house, most agents will go out and look at the house. Or they'll send somebody from their company out 3 to 6 months later to look at it, and they'll catch the pool in, which that's one good thing I like about Farm Bureau, or at least with the North Madison agency. Everybody that calls us for a quote, we go out and look at the house first before we give you a quote. That way, we know pools. So we put the surcharge on there. That way you don't buy the house. Most companies, they quote you over the phone. They send somebody from their home office out 3 to 6 months later. You could even get a letter in the mail that says, hey, we're canceling your insurance because we found out you had a pool. Whereas that's where we go out and do all that up front. It's a little bit more work on us up front, because, we might do that, go out and take a picture, do a quote, and not get the business. So it's time that we've spent going out and doing that, but we like to make sure we quote it correct up front.
And I totally respect that, because it's just like us for a job on a pool. It's the same kind of concept how I'm looking at this. If somebody says, hey, I need some work done on my pool, well, I need to come out and I need to quote it, So I need to know what work's involved, what's going on, to quote it accordingly. So I like that. Is that maybe something that separates you guys and other insurance companies?
And that's what, I've built my business based on customer service. I don't like anything changing. So that's why I've always went out first to see the property, make sure we quote it exactly 100% correct up front. That way it doesn't change on you 3 months down the road, or you get canceled.
I like that. That's great. So that's really good. So let me ask you this. Let's get into and you got some good stories, some cases, some things, What about, because this is always the thing of owning a swimming pool, whether you own it or you want to build one. So let's just say you get the correct permits, you get the correct fencing, everything like that. Let's just say that, like the worst case scenario always everyone talks about, a child from a neighbor's home or a friend or somebody comes and gets into the pool and something happens. How does that fall of being covered, or things like that? Is that...
Now, other companies, I've heard horror stories that they'll try to wiggle out of a claim, any way they can. With Farm Bureau, especially if there's a minor involved, we pay policy limits. So most homeowners policies, you have, personal liability, which is included on the policy. Standard is $100,000. Okay. Now as you get older, you got more wealth, people tend to raise that number on the liability. So, you could have 300 or $500,000 on there. But with Farm Bureau, pretty much every time I've known of or heard of a small child falling in the pool, we write them a check for that liability amount.
Gotcha. And John, on this topic, it's so important because this is probably one of the number one to number two question I get all the time is, if somebody falls or slips and falls on my property, in my pool, what happens, And that's why we always go back to insurance. Just like we had an episode, we were talking with a lawyer, and, he's going on saying, they're usually suing the insurance companies, as a plaintiff, whatever. But the point is, the more insurance to at least cover you so they can't come after your personal assets is probably a good thing, right?
And that's why you want to sit down with your agent and make sure you let them know, what your assets are. That way you've got enough liability on there to cover you. Because the way insurance works is, let's say I try to skimp on insurance and I've got, say, $50,000 on my liability. Say a child or somebody does jump in the pool, gets hurt, whatever. They get an attorney, they sue you. Well, if they're hurt real bad, we may say, okay, here's $50,000. We're going to go ahead and pay you policy limits, which if they know the person that owns the pool, say, has $500,000 sitting in stocks, bonds, savings accounts, money markets, checking accounts, investments, things like that. They'll say, no, we don't want your $50,000. We're going after them personally. So that's where, and that's what insurance is for. You want the insurance company paying the money, not coming out of your personal wealth.
That's how I would look at it, and that would be for sure, So, John, that was a really good point and information you're giving us here. So tell us some stories or some cases that you know of in insurance where people, insurance companies had to pay out where, somebody jumps in, falls, gets hurt in the pool, or child, things like that,
Most of my claims here, me personally, most of mine are wind blowing a table or chairs into the pool, ripping a liner, something like that. So all mine's been pretty simple.
Which that's good. I mean, at least we haven't had any crazy cases.
We haven't had any bad ones here in Madison County, knock on wood. But now I have had a couple agents within Farm Bureau. I had one guy that somebody was at his house swimming with him, jumped in the shallow end, hit his head, and got paralyzed from the neck down. That's one, and it's a little tricky to me because really in home insurance, you're supposed to be negligent when it comes to, an injury to a person. So like now, if the guy pushes him in the pool and he falls in and gets paralyzed, yes, that's what we should pay out liability for. But like this guy, he jumped in the pool, he knew it was a shallow end, he gets paralyzed, he still gets an attorney and gets us for $300,000. Was he drinking?
No, I don't know if that was involved or not. But that's always the big thing is, like you hear public pools, people go out on vacation, do all the, whatever, and they're on the top, second floor, third balcony trying to jump off into the pool and then want to sue. It's like, once again, I always come back to somebody could sue for hot coffee, Right. And I'm sure on your all's end, that's probably something that you guys want to fight is saying, where's the common sense rule too?
Right. True. And that's why. So I just tell people, if you've got a pool, make sure you've got that liability on your policy to cover your assets. Now, you can take out your house value. I've never known of an insurance company to make you auction off your house. But yeah, anything you've got in like checking, savings, money markets, stocks, bonds, and investments, make sure you got more than that on your liability.
So, John, this is a lot of great information. Another question I have, I talk a lot about homes as far as brick homes, and when we think of homes in a swimming pool, a lot of people think, upper class, things like that. And I'm not trying to go classes, but, we've been putting a lot of pools in for people that own trailers or have a farm, So is there a difference in insurance as far as when it comes to above ground, in ground on a farm versus a mobile home, things like that?
Yeah, basically, your home, you got that 10% I was talking about, which if you build a nice pool, you want to add more. But now farms and mobile homes are totally different. You've got to schedule them a pool on the policy to have coverage on a farm or a mobile home policy. So it goes back to, I always recommend contact your agent. I'm always looking out to cover myself, so I like to email.
CYA.
Yes. I'm a big fan of email because, you might be with an agent that got you with a company that says, no, we don't allow pools. And he knows if he turns that in, they're going to cancel you, and he's going to lose a client. So, I've heard the horror stories of, people getting, hurt in a pool and not having any coverage because the agent never put it on the policy. And then they say, oh, I didn't know about you, never called me. So I'm a firm believer, cover your tracks, cover yourself. Send an email to that company or your agent to let them know you've got a pool. That way, if they did ever come back and try to deny claims saying that you never notified us, you've got that paper trail. So
that's a good point. So any insurance company you're going with, and sounds like John, obviously his company here, Farm Bureau, does a great job as far as crossing T's, dotting I's. But as far as you as a homeowner, double check your policy, double check some things, that you're getting. So another thing, man, I want to ask you a question. We get this a lot, especially above grounds, from pools that collapse or wind damage, things like that. For example, we did one. We did 2 last year. We already got 1 on the books for this year on above ground, where insurance is taking care of it for wind damage. So, can you kind of explain, how those things are taken care of, or how that works?
Yeah, basically, wind damage on above ground is going to be covered. That's one of our main ones on the above ground pools. And going back to, I was talking about earlier, most of our pools, you get that it's considered another structure on like a home policy. An above ground pool that is easy to move, which now I don't know if you guys do many of those, because most of those are the ones you blow up yourself or you put up yourself. Those are, if it's easily movable, it's considered personal property. So it would be considered contents or personal property under your policy. But now going back to your question, wind damage is covered. Now if a pool just collapses, that is not covered by insurance.
Now when you say just collapses, as in like an above ground, though, you're talking more in ground, though. Is that correct? What
Correct.
Collapses? Okay.
Yeah, so most of your collapse that's not going to be covered is in ground. But even in above ground, if for some odd reason you got one with walls and it just somehow which I don't think an in ground or above ground could fall, and it would go out.
And you got a point. It can happen with a terrible install, or if it wasn't level. There could be some of those discrepancies.
So now, like I said, if it's truly wind, but now if you call your insurance company and there was no wind that day, we had no storm, and your pool above ground pool
nothing
collapses,
on record.
That's where it goes back to the install, and that would go back to basically your general liability.
Gotcha. Okay. So on that note, you got a good point with in-ground swimming pools, because we had an instance 2 years ago. We put a fiberglass pool in. We were digging down, and we hit karst area, which is groundwater around it. On this, we had water coming in as fast as it was also going out. So it was kind of scary, because it was one of the first times we've seen groundwater, and we know how to a lot of times deal with that, know what to do. But as far as like hitting, I don't know, we call that karst area in a swell, but what about sinkholes or something like that? As far as liability and insurance, how does that kind of work with, if that was to happen? You have a pool, it's gorgeous, a year later, because of maybe like we've had all this rain. Yeah.
Years ago you could get no coverage for it. After the Corvette Museum collapsed.
That's a good one.
A few years ago, actually, Farm Bureau started doing some research, and we found out in Kentucky, we had sinkholes, I think, from what I've understand about it, comes from, we have a large limestone base in Kentucky.
100%.
So that's where really the big sinkholes are. So Kentucky has a big risk of sinkholes. And after the Corvette Museum collapsed, Farm Bureau did some research, and in Kentucky, your house is more likely to be damaged by a sinkhole than it is an earthquake.
Wow.
So after that, that's when Farm Bureau, they like to take care of their members. We came out with an endorsement. You can now add to cover your house, sinking in and getting damaged by a sinkhole, which would go back to the pool too. So as long as you had the pool insured and then, sinkhole endorsement, if the pool did collapse in due to a sinkhole, we would cover that.
So with a lot of the notes today of information of insurance, I hope this has helped you all and all our viewers out there. So once again, kind of recap, John, just the overall of insurance as far as how important it is. Get with your insurance agent, make sure you're covered. And what I'm gaining from this is, if you especially buy a home with a pool, or you add a swimming pool to your home, it's important to make sure you're valuing that properly.
Right. Most people buy a house with a pool or build one. The build is the big thing. Most people will build a pool and never call their insurance company. Well, one, because they're afraid, they're going to cancel me, or it's going to make my insurance go up. But if you're sitting there with a $200,000 house, you got $20,000 coverage, and you build a $100,000 or a $50,000 pool, the house burns down or a tornado hits it, you just lost $30,000. So that's why I always recommend make sure you contact your agent.
That's awesome. Thank you guys for watching. We're John Rader of Farm Bureau Insurance, and this is another episode of Pool Guys Unfiltered. Please send us all of your questions and anything related to pools and spas. We'll be more than happy to answer them. And if American Pool and Spa, if we don't know the answer, we will get the professional that knows that answer. So I'm Justin with American Pool and Spa in Richmond, Kentucky. Leave it to us. Just swim and relax.